Not stay away.
We must be careful, someone comes.
What could stop Europe's finest armored cavalry with nothing more than a spike and a stick? The Godendag Good Morning in Flemish could, and did. And what tool let you own your wealthy enemy without killing him? The brutally practical man-catcher. In this 7th episode, we explore 10 weapons that prove medieval battlefields ran on creativity and cost-benefit math, a peasant's pole that shattered feudal confidence at Courtrai, a 2-meter sword that earned double pay, and a collar on a stick designed to turn nobles into paydays. Godendag, the people's weapon. The Godendag, Good Morning, was almost primitive, a stout hardwood staff capped with a single iron spike projecting from its crown. There were fancier versions with bands or studs, but the core logic never changed: reach, stiffness, and a killing point. Where a bill or halberd carried multiple edges and hooks, the Godendag trusted the oldest geometry on Earth, a straight line between a mass in motion and something soft enough to lose. That simplicity kept cost down, training short, and maintenance trivial. If a shaft split or a spike bent, village smiths knew exactly what to do. The weapon's genius was how it merged two purposes. In the opening crush, the iron spike turned momentum against the oncoming horse, man, or both. Once bodies hit mud, the same staff became a club for decisive, ugly work. In rank with neighbors, Godendags stacked into a fence of upward teeth. In singles, they were walking arguments about leverage. Even the name reads like a taunt delivered at arm's length. Good morning and goodbye. A peasant's budget birthed it. A peasant's problem set refined it. You needed timber you could source locally, iron you could afford, and a drill you could teach your cousin in a week. You didn't need heraldry to make it matter. You needed ground that told hooves no, and a line of hands unwilling to move an inch. The Godendag's defining hour came at Courtrai in 1302, where Flemish militias and townsmen faced the cream of French chivalry. The burghers didn't bring many horses. They brought discipline, mud sense, and hedges of spikes. When French men-at-arms charged across constricted, marshy approaches, their momentum became a liability. Horses shied, riders jammed. The perfect line dissolved into clots of iron and panic. Flemings anchored their poles, angled spikes, and let physics perform its sermon. When it ended, the field glittered with golden spurs, so many that the battle earned a second name, the Battle of the Golden Spurs. Spurs marked status, but that day, they marked a collection. Armor didn't fail because metal is weak. It failed because terrain, formation, and a cheap spike refused to play the aristocrat's game. Courtrai did not eliminate cavalry, but it punched a permanent hole in its aura, and the hole looked a lot like an iron point on a stick. Chroniclers wrote of pride humbled and towns emboldened. Strategy books quietly adjusted their chapters on what a charge can solve. From then on, a commander had to ask his ground for permission before he promised his knights the finish. The Godendag's genius tactic was brutally teachable. Root the butt in earth, brace with the rear foot, and offer the spike to the line of approach. A charging horse meets a planted lever, not a man. If the mount refuses, the charge breaks. If the mount continues, the math hurts everyone on that vector, and the rider risks a sudden introduction to air followed by club logic. Once a knight hit the ground, vision narrowed by visor, breath limited by harness, the Godendag switched modes from pike to maul. Cavalry doctrine expects give in the enemy. A hedgehog denies it. The trick isn't simply planting a forest of points, it's doing it on cue. Militiamen practice timing lower on the signal, feel the shaft bite soil, lean into impact without overcommitting and slipping. To the eye, it looks passive. To the neck and wrists, it's work. The Godendag rewarded collective rhythm and punished heroics. In a world that lionized single combat, that was counterculture and highly effective. Add ditches, stakes, or any damp patch, and the device went from good to perfect. Horses have instincts you can borrow. Make the ground say don't, and the rider's training crashes into their mount's survival sense. A Godendag cost perhaps 1/50th of a knight's full harness and warhorse package. That ratio was the real revolution. The weapon didn't just pierce plate, it pierced an assumption that high expense buys decisive advantage. Courtrai broadcast a message across Europe: industrialize simple lethality, and you can budget break the upper class. Town treasuries could arm hundreds for the cost of feeding a handful of nobles' horses. This wasn't merely accounts, it was politics with splinters. The confidence of cavalry waned wherever militia drills thickened. Infantry formations armed with cheap poles began to anchor battle plans. The people's weapon didn't topple feudalism tax registers, and lawyers did that later, but it deleted the monopoly of armored riders on victory. When cheap beats prestige often enough, prestige learns new tricks, or goes home early. The lesson outlived the model. Later, pikes, bills, and halberds wore the same ledger smile. Timber plus iron plus training weekend equals problem for a prince. On the other end of the spectrum stood the Zweihänder, 5 to 6 feet of blade, with rare giants near 7, carried by men who turned a sword into a portable breech. Typical weights ran about 14 pounds less than legend says, but enough to make poor mechanics costly. In practiced hands, the weapon was not a flailing burden. It was a long lever, capable of parting pikes, bullying polearms, and terrifying the undecided. The Zweihänder's silhouette tells you its job. A long ricasso, the unsharpened section just ahead of the guard, often leather-wrapped, invited a second hand up the blade for closer control. Many carried parrying hooks, just beyond the guard, to catch, bind, or shove opposing shafts, and to keep an enemy's weapon from sliding down to your knuckles. In line fights, that meant you could step into the forest of points and make aisles where none existed. No one pretended this was for everyone. The weapon ate training hours and calories. But, in the right moment, when pike heads tangled, when courage faltered, the sight of a long blade scissoring space did work on nerves as well as wood. The German Landsknechts professionalized the Zweihänder, and the men who mastered it drew double pay, Doppelsoldner. They weren't decorative. Commanders used them like moving gateways, striding into enemy hedge lines, hacking shafts, knocking aside points, and creating seams for comrades with halberds, pikes, and shot to exploit. Against heavy foot, the Zweihänder did not so much cut through armor as cut through order, which is how formations die. Double wages bought more than bravado. It bought risk concentration. A Doppelsoldner had to know when to throttle up, when to half sword at the ricasso for control, and when to swing big to harvest panic. They also needed team choreography. A long blade, isolated, is a long target. Inside a coordinated push, it is a metronome that the enemy can't ignore. The pay premium tells you a lot about period economics. If a skill can multiply lanes in a pike fight, the treasurer will find coins for it. Breadth of shoulder helped, breadth of judgment mattered more. The Zweihänder's ricasso isn't a flourish, it's hand placement doctrine engraved in steel. Gripping high tames a long blade in crush ranges on stairs, at breaches on wagon ramps, where yard-long arcs aren't possible. With a palm on leather and the other on the hilt, a swordsman turns sweeping cuts into short levers, pinning or prying polearms while keeping an edge in reserve for the moment a lane opens. The parrying hooks act like stops and claws. Catch a pike, shove it out of line, step past the tip, and now the poleman is a man with a staff that's too long for the room. Hooks also keep sliding weapons from chewing your hands when you bind along the flat. Add a broad crossguard and a disciplined stance, and you get a tool that punishes extension. Every inch an enemy reaches becomes an inch you can steal. All of this works because the wielder respects geometry. Blade as lever, lugs as fulcrum, hands as movable pivots. The Zweihänder is not a club, it's a plan. Not every weapon aspired to kill. The man-catcher optimized for profit and compliance. Why crush a lord when you can invoice him? In ransom economies, a living noble was a walking treasury bill. A dead one was used armor and a funeral. One recorded French ransom equates roughly to 6 million modern dollars, a reminder that strategy often wore an accountant's smile. The tool itself was disarmingly simple, a long staff topped with a hinged metal collar, its inner rim set with spikes or barbs angled to discourage withdrawal without instantly slitting arteries. Snap it around a neck, shoulder, or limb, twist to off balance, and hold. With reach on your side, you could yank a rider from the saddle or lock a dismounted noble into a mobile jail until friends noticed their investment walking away. It wasn't nice. It was efficient, a way to turn battlefield chaos into cash flow, while honoring the rules of ransom the elite themselves wrote. Mechanically, the man-catcher is leverage, masquerading as mercy. The collar's hinge closes fast. The spikes bite enough to warn, not to sever. Once latched, the staff becomes a control bar. A fast twist torques the head. A downward shove folds knees. A pull backwards robs balance. Against helmets with narrow vision slits and heavy gorgets, approach from the blind arc, clamp, and rotate. The body follows wherever the neck is told. Mounted targets were prime. A footman with reach could hook the collar over a rider's shoulder or helm rim and unseat him, pinning one arm with the pole and turning a male champion into a stumbling bundle. The device also worked in corridors, on ladders, and near gates, anywhere space narrowed, and keeping distance won the minute. A squad could allocate roles. Spear to threaten, catcher to claim, dagger to discourage rescue. Moral qualms rarely survived line items. Bring back 3 barons alive, and your lord forgives a lot of technique. The man-catcher excelled where opponents wore helmets that tunneled vision. Flanking from the quarter a visor can't see, the catcher arrives as a surprise geometry problem. Once the collar clicks, you don't need to be stronger. You need to be cleverer with angles. Twist across the line of the spine, steer toward uneven ground, and let gravity sap dignity. Lances and swords help at range. At 2 feet, a pole with a purpose wins. Against cavalry, the play was simple. Catch, wrench, and let inertia betray status. Against foot nobles, teams used the catcher to immobilize while ropes or chains did the lasting work. And through it all, the spreadsheet hummed. A captive meant negotiations, heralds, guarantees, and silver that rattled all the way home. Warfare is terror, yes, but also arithmetic. The trio Godendag Zweihänder Mancatcher tells one story in 3 accents: cheap spikes that humbled charges, long blades that parted order, and collars that monetized victory. Creativity wasn't decoration, it was survival. From budget spikes that erased knightly swagger to double-paid long blades that carved lanes and a collar on a stick that turned nobles into revenue, medieval battle was an arms race of ideas as much as iron. Which tool would you carry? Peasant power, formation breaker, or ransom machine? Share, drop your pick in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss part 8 where we meet the Morning Star and the first wave of siege monsters.